After my mom's divorce, she fell for a charming ex-con. But when a coworker exposed that he was cheating, everything unraveled. So we get revenge. I moved back home with my mom the summer after I flunked out of my first semester of college. It was the kind of collapse that feels both private and obvious. Like you're standing in the middle of a crowded room holding a sign that says, "I don't know what I'm doing." Mom waved me off at first. "You'll figure it out, kiddo." But 2 weeks later, she did what moms do. She scraped together groceries, cleared a corner of the house for me and my things, and quietly accepted that this was a new chapter for both of us. If you'd asked me to describe our old life in one sentence, I would have said, 25 years of marriage to someone who could charm a room and poison a house. My dad, my biological father, was brilliant at conversation and measured at manipulation. When the marriage finally collapsed, it didn't explode in fireworks or courtroom drama. It tapered out like a slow gas leak. Arguments disguised as concerns. Guilt coupons for bad behavior. Promises stitched to excuses. My mom left, and for once the thing that had kept her small, fear of looking unstable, fear of being alone, was gone. I thought we'd both breathe easier. We did for a while. We moved into a tiny rental a few towns over, closer to her job at the county jail where she worked as a corrections officer. The house was small and smelled of lavender and bleach, and the sudden quiet that comes when two people remove years of tension from a room. My brother and sister came home too. We made that house our scaled-down ecosystem. Dinner at awkward hours, late-night Netflix marathons that were mostly mom relearning what a sitcom laugh track was, laundry folded into piles so small it seemed ridiculous. Then mom introduced us to Chris. She brought him over on a Saturday after a night shift, tired but smiling, hair stuck up in a way that made him look like he'd been trying to be both charming and blasé at the same time. He said hello, hugged mom, and sat down like he was already part of the furniture. I knew where the red flags were supposed to be. The one I noticed first was the shiny scar on his forearm, thin, pale, the kind of thing that could have been a barbed wire tattoo gone wrong, or an old kitchen accident. My mom introduced him as a friend at first, then boyfriend. It came out like a punctuation mark after too many exclamation points, relieved and startled at once. If you'd given me an objective list of reasons to be suspicious, the top of it would have read, "He was a former inmate, DUI," Mom told us quietly. As if that was all it was. That should have been the first flag. Maybe it would have been the second or third if we'd put the dots together faster. But she was grieving a long marriage and seemed to have landed on someone who made her laugh. The way she relaxed when he walked into a room made me defer judgment. The last thing I wanted to do was be the kid who told mom she was making a mistake. Again. Things fell into place weirdly fast. Chris had a goofy, low-key sense of humor and a love for video games that landed him bonus points from me. We sat cross-legged on the living room carpet and traded controllers like some domestic ritual. My brother and sister warmed up too. He could be funny, and he had this knack for making my mom crack up in a way she hadn't in years. For a while, we were okay. For a while, we had the fragile, improbable feeling that maybe we were all going to be okay. Then 2017 happened. It started with a day that looked like any other. Chris had to report to the courthouse for his probation check-ins. Routine, a box to check, a line on an official form that mostly existed to remind him he was watched. He kissed mom on the head, told us he'd be back by noon, and left with his jacket slung over his shoulder. He didn't come back. At first, we joked about it. "Traffic," my brother said, always the optimist. Maybe he got held in court. By dinner, though, jokes frayed thin. By night, we were worrying in the small, taut way you worry when you know 3 phone numbers by heart. Do you call his mom? His work? The courthouse? The phone call came in the tone of movies, static, then shock. It was Chris on the line, but he wasn't in the county. He was in Texas. He told us, breathless and quick and weirdly mechanical, that when he walked into the courthouse that morning, he was taken aside by federal agents. The FBI, he said, had questions. At first, Mom thought it was something to do with his DUI records, paperwork, some dumb clerical thing. The rest of the story dropped like a stone. Chris had family in Texas. Not the kind of big family summer barbecue folks. The kind of blood that bled into a different lifestyle. Gang ties, drug trafficking, a vehicle implicated in handoffs. He had been in the wrong place at the wrong time in the past. Or maybe he'd been in the right place if you asked the prosecutors. Either way, the feds wanted him. The event at the courthouse wasn't a misunderstanding. It was an arrest with conditions, be an informant, testify against family, or face the consequences himself. He agreed to cooperate. It was, to him apparently, a rational calculus. Testify, get leniency, get usable time, keep moving. For Mom, it was a different calculus entirely. Suddenly, the man who made her smile was in a national legal drama. And our living room, our small lavender and bleach sanctuary, was a front row seat to something dangerous I'd only seen on TV. When he got out, an arrangement for witness protection light or whatever frail, optimistic legal safety net the system can offer. Things reassembled themselves in the same space with a new rhythm. He went back to work at the Dairy Queen, where he'd been a shift manager. People treated him like someone on a tightrope, normal but a little wary. Mom held onto him tighter. He came home less and less like himself, and more like a man whose bones were made of something cheaper, brittle, glassy, prone to snapping. We all tried to be normal, but once you watch the sky break, you notice the cracks everywhere. The drinking started slow, and then stubbornly, smoothly, like water finding cracks in concrete. What had been one beer became a six-pack. A six-pack became half a 24-pack a day. Chris, who had been dependable in small domestic ways, started to unravel when the amber haze of alcohol set in. He became mean drunk. Mean drunk is an ugly phrase. It suggests fights, maybe slaps, maybe pushed plates. We were lucky in that the alcoholism manifested mostly orally. Venom delivered in sentences like small knives. He would pick at Mom in ways I didn't know were legal. He'd rattle the cage we'd all worked so hard to keep steady. Once, at dinner, he told my sister she needed to learn to cook like people who matter. Once, he cornered my brother about college money in a way that left my sibling feeling smaller than the chair he'd been sitting in. Mom made excuses. Work stress. The trial coming up. The fear of being alone again. She tried to mediate, to calm him, to provide the soft shoulder of a woman who had already bled enough. I resented how forgiving she was. It felt like watching someone keep watering a plant that had dug its roots into your life and started poisoning everything else. There was a turning point I still replay in my head. It was the night she finally said enough. He came home so plastered that the staircase looked like a series of blurred steps. She asked him, said it plain, even with shaking hands, if he'd been drinking. He didn't deny it. She told him to leave. He staggered out into the night and slept at a friend's place. The morning light found us thin with a sense of calm we hadn't felt in months. The plan, though, hatched like something out of a mean-spirited black comedy. Mom wanted him gone. She wanted to minimize drama. "I don't want him wrecking himself on the porch at 3 a.m., she said. She asked us, children who'd had our fill of bad male influence, to gather a few of his essentials. Comb, a change of clothes, his favorite mug. She insisted he not come back until he was sober. We were gathering his things when the knock came at the front door. I knew Betty, high school acquaintance and one of the DQ staff, when I opened the door. Her face had a tightly held urgency, an edge of royal discomfort. "Can I talk to your mom?" she asked. She told us she had something important to share, and unlike the rest of the universe, she actually did. Betty sat down and told my mom not to ask where she had gotten her information. She had seen Chris with a woman named Darla. She told Mom, halting and fierce, that she'd caught them performing sexual acts at the DQ, on and around the premises. The story should have been a punchline in a bad movie. The manager and an employee doing something stupid in a public place. But the way Betty told it, like a confession she didn't want but had to make, made it clear this was real and ugly. And then there was the last crowning point. Darla was pregnant. Mom's face did a hard thing I had never seen before. She folded into a little silence, then shoved the silence away with a single steady decision. We packed every single thing of Chris's. The jacket he'd left hanging by the door, his raspberry-scented soap, the ugly mugs he used to put on the coffee table. We walked them to the back alley and dumped them like a bad yard sale. I will never forget watching his things, every tiny piece of him, strewn across the pavement and gutter like evidence. He had been banished effectively. The house meant Mom's name on the lease, and that meant he couldn't just walk back in. We called him. He didn't beg in the way I'd imagined. He confessed. He didn't apologize. He said in a voice like a blade that he was happy Darla was pregnant because it meant he would finally have a child of his own. The last time I'd heard that tone was when my dad explained away everything with a charm that never landed. It was not a man asking forgiveness. It was a man taking credit. Mom arranged for an officer to be present when he collected his things from the alley. He walked away with a duffel bag and an arrogance that made me sick. We could have left it there. Mom wanted to. She wanted one clean cut, one close to the bone. She wanted the curtains drawn and her life rearranged without him. But my brother, sister, and I had been hardened by years of seeing what sliding tolerance did to someone you loved. We had watched the slow corrosion of Mom's boundaries, The way forgiveness had been treated as currency to be cashed in for pain. We wanted more than closure. We wanted consequence. So we made a plan. It wasn't emergent cinematic terrorism. It was stupid, petty, domestic, and perfect for what we needed. We would ruin the part of his life he clung to. The job. The place he was safe enough to think he could stroll back into the world. We would not be violent. We would be bureaucratic and exhausting, like sand in an engine. We called his workplace. DQ franchises are independently owned, and the owner of his branch was a man with several stores and a reputation for running a tight ship. We called and told him what Betty had told Mom. The sexual acts on premises, the threats to Betty's job, the pregnancy. We didn't embellish. We just gave facts and names, and we promised to put them in writing if he wanted. The owner, a large man with a shirt that fit his chest like armor, didn't take long. He launched an investigation, and within a week, Chris was out. He was barred from the area branches. I still get a guilty little pride when I remember Betty. Last I heard, she got his position. She runs it like someone polishing a trophy now. One fired job is a slap. We were just getting started. Losing his job unleashed a desperate, visible side of him. He went to live with Darla in the nearby town, an hour away, where, weirdly, he found employment again at another DQ. It was like watching a man who had fallen through cheap scaffolding only to knock another plank into place and start climbing. We called that owner, too. We told them what we knew and what we suspected. That branch didn't have the same smoking gun Betty had, and it took longer, but the dominoes started to wobble. The darker, more dangerous threads of this all were not job loss. They were the things you can't trade back like a shirt. His inability to be lawful, his continued probation for the prior DUI, and a kind of invisible arrogance that said rules didn't apply to him. He began driving around our neighborhood like a ghost with headlights. It was unnerving. He'd cruise past at odd hours, sometimes slow, sometimes stopping to just sit in his car, watching the house. I saw the silhouette of him a handful of times, and felt something cold and animal coil inside my chest. He had no license. Probation had never been lifted. Driving was not supposed to be possible for him. We informed the police. We told them the brand of Darla's vehicle and gave them times when we'd seen it. We asked them, politely, and later not so politely, to pull the car over if they saw it driving. We were worried about safety, but also about enforceable consequences. If he was driving without a license and intoxicated, that was a reportable offense. If he kept showing up at work and the pattern repeated, there were grounds for action. A few weeks later, officers called. They'd pulled the vehicle and found Chris behind the wheel, intoxicated and without a license. He was arrested and taken to the local jail. It felt like a theater of justice, cold, efficient, and a little mechanical. The arrest triggered a search at the home where he was staying, and it turned up something none of us expected: several firearms. As a felon, possession of weaponry was an automatic weighty crime. The authorities tacked on charges, and suddenly the man who had once been allowed to walk into our house with Mom's forgiveness in his pocket was being processed by a system that had fewer jokes and more forms. He was sent back to jail. The dates started to stack. Local hold time for the DUI and possession, then extradition or transfer back to Texas for the larger case. By the time the legal machinery slowed and restarted, there was an intermission of silence that felt like survival. Darla had the child, Chris's child, while he was behind bars. The irony was so sharp it could have been sharpened into a blade. He sought fatherhood because he wanted to be anchored, and the result was a son birthed into a father's absence. While he sat in county lockups and traveled through the legal system, he started sending letters to Mom. They were the kind of letters that fit into the category of performative remorse, notes stuffed with "I'm sorries" and "it's not my fault," and promises that resembled bargain shopping at a clearance rack. She burned them all, the way you burn the last of an old relationship's bills. We had hoped, naively, that jail time would have humbled him. It didn't exactly. What it did instead was set in motion the kind of slow, bureaucratic revenge we had been orchestrating all along. He lost jobs. He lost space. He lost any residual goodwill. His name, once familiar at the local DQs, was quiet in the circle of shops he used to think were his. When he did get out for a stretch, his options were thin. Darla moved on and cut ties. The child he so eagerly claimed had a mother refusing to have more contact with him. He eventually finished his sentence for the Texas trial. Time is a strange thing in prison. Days fold into each other like cheap paper and lose their names. He came out into a life that was less a homecoming and more a series of dull obstacles. Fighting child support claims, fighting for any sort of stable job, shuffling through apartments that smelled of other people's cooking and stale air. We moved out of state not to run, but to breathe. Mom bought a little fixer-upper, and the three of us, her, Me, my brother, worked on it like a project that felt less like labor and more like a Jenga tower we were trying to reassemble, right? The climax, the thing that felt like the final scene in a revenge movie, wasn't one night of violence or a scathing viral post. It was months and years of small, legal, boringly perfect consequences that added up. Jobs revoked. Arrests made. Probation violated. A child born in a world without him. The cumulative effect was a life rearranged by the sheer weight of responsibility he'd voluntarily thrown away. We rarely talk about the revenge in the way the internet likes to talk about it. There's no booming soundtrack or slow-motion shots of somebody tripping in a mall. What we have is a set of quiet results. Mom met someone new, the kind of person who brings her coffee in the morning and doesn't shame her for the way she laughs. And she is, by every measure I can see, happier. My brother and sister have lives that aren't tethered to our old house. We've painted the new one in colors that make the light come in differently. I still live with Mom sometimes, helping with renovations, learning how to patch drywall and coax carpets into being less heinous. Life looks okay, not cinematic, not insanely triumphant, but even. I wrestle with ethics and a minor persistent guilt. We orchestrated a professional fallout for a man who, in many ways, had set his own life on fire. Did we do something that was petty and awful? Maybe, but there's a difference between petty and necessary. He'd been allowed to manipulate and hurt us for a while because the nature of his charm let him. We decided not to be passive actors in the theater of his life anymore. Sometimes I daydream about different outcomes. Maybe Chris could have gotten clean, attended treatment, made amends in a way that actually repaired the harm. Maybe he would have been a better father. I find myself patting my brain, searching for a place where redemption and accountability meet. The truth is messy. Accountability often eats the neat arc of redemption for breakfast. People like my mom and me learn, painfully, that the idea of giving someone a chance has boundaries, especially once your mental, financial, and emotional bandwidth are exhausted. There are practical updates that people often ask in the comments to these kinds of stories. Yes, Betty is actually running the Dairy Queen she used to work at. Yes, Darla filed for child support. And yes, the courts made him pay something. Though of course it never covers the emotional tax. No, I haven't seen him in person since he moved to Kansas. When he got out, he moved there. Far enough away not to be a nightly threat. Close enough that we could breathe. What we found instead of gloating verdicts was a kind of peace. It wasn't the dramatic, satisfying, cinematic final scene where the villain slips on a banana peel. It was a slow unfurling of normal, good hair days, a neighbor bringing over sourdough, the ding of a text message that says, "How's the remodel?" It's a quieter, less viral joy, but real. We stopped measuring our lives in moments of betrayal. We started measuring in mundane stitches. An evening that didn't end with screaming. A dinner that didn't come with someone's humiliation as an appetizer.